Hello, and welcome to You Can Grow Your Own Way, a conversation for parents and carers of neurodivergent children. I feel so privileged you are taking time out of your busy life to learn all about the ways to interpret neurodivergence for you and your child. Remember, all advice on this podcast is general and may not specifically apply to your child, so we encourage you to also talk to your GP, paediatrician or specialist to see if what you've learned will help your family. Hello and welcome to another Taboo Topics episode of You Can Grow Your Own Way. How do I introduce today? I introduce today by saying that this is a discussion that is incredibly important, incredibly emotive, I think for some people incredibly personal, and can feel very uncomfortable. Today we will be talking about child-to-parent violence, something that unfortunately does occur in the neurodivergent space. It is not a symptom of neurodivergence, but is sometimes a complex response to having wiring that makes it complicated to fit into a neurotypical world and manage emotions that your brain is not quite ready to understand. I think it's very important to say that I know I found this a really intense conversation. There is a lot of lived experience that is shared in this episode, which is incredibly important, but can also feel incredibly confronting. Topic warnings: we do discuss ideation of suicide and self-harm. There are conversations around child-to-parent and intimate partner violence. So if these topics are triggering for you, I completely understand that you choose not to listen to this particular episode, or that you may need to seek assistance and have a conversation with people after listening to this. I am incredibly grateful that Lee Tempest has joined us for this conversation. She has been very generous with how much she has shared. And while this topic is very heavy, it's something that is necessary to talk about. So Lee works for VisAble, and it's a disabled person-led organisation based in Aotearoa, New Zealand. They work to strengthen national capabilities across agencies and sectors to prevent and respond to violence, abuse and neglect affecting disabled people and their families. Their focus includes the deaf, neurodivergent and adults at risk. And Lee is a mum to 2 adopted neurodivergent children and has many years of lived experience of child-to-parent violence and abuse. And she has a great knowledge of systemic barriers within the service provision due to lack of awareness about this form of family harm. Lee has a Bachelor of Social Work with honours and a Diploma in Mental Health and Addiction. She's also a trauma-informed integrative somatic facilitator, and she comes to us with deep compassion, and I'm looking forward to talking to her now. So, Lee, I thought it would be really, really important to start today off by busting the myth that still exists that all neurodivergent children are violent. And I think that that's probably a really good thing to clarify before we get into talking about the broader discourse around child-to-parent violence. So in your experience, have you come across this myth, and what do you say to that?
Yes, it is a myth. Most children who are neurodivergent won't be violent, but there does seem to be an increased prevalence rate of child-to-parent violence in the neurodivergent community compared to the neurotypical. But that's quite often because a lot of that's unmet needs in the community, like at school, and other people's expectations as well, which can lead to an increase in frustration. So there's very many reasons why this can happen, but absolutely it's not a neurodivergent problem. It's an everybody's problem.
Beautiful, thank you, and so well summarised. So what do we classify as child-to-parent violence?
It's a broad range of behaviours that a child can exhibit towards the parents, and it can be physical. When we think of violence, we always think of physical violence, but actually violence encompasses so much more. And it's physical, it can be verbal, emotional, coercive control is a big one, property damage, hurting pets. Sexual abuse towards the parents, which is a big taboo subject that we just do not talk about. So it can encompass many different types of violence. And a lot of parents, because it can become quite normalised, don't even realise that it is forms of violence like coercive control. We have parents who've told me that they have to sit in a certain chair, they have to ask permission to go to use the toilet. So coercive control can be quite strong, but it can also be more subtle as well. So yeah, it's very many different types of violence, and it's a pattern of behaviour that the child will display towards the parents. And the parents quite often feel unsafe, they feel controlled, they feel manipulated, they feel ashamed, they think it's their parenting, and
Mhm.
it's not their parenting. That's another myth, that it's down to parenting and permissive parenting. It's not.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into in this conversation a discussion around parent guilt and how that can impact, I think, the desire to get help and the desire to be willing to talk about it. I know that can be really, really loaded for parents. So I guess it would be really interesting to clarify, and everyone's experience to a degree will be different because what is extreme for you might not feel extreme for somebody else. But the line between when we're looking at we've got poor impulse control and emotional immaturity, which is leading to sometimes lashing out or pinching or things like that, and crossing that line over into what we would count as child to parent violence.
It's very different. It is a fine line, isn't it? Because, like what you say, what is acceptable to one person is not acceptable to another. But if your child is hurting you, even though we understand the reasons why, poor impulse control, frustration, and we understand why it's happening, it can still be violence. And there's a big debate whether to call it violence or not. Some parents don't like to think of their child as being violent, and that's okay. And they say it's challenging behaviour. But I found when you talk about challenging behaviour, a lot of professionals view that very different to if you say my child's being violent to me. And challenging behaviour gets minimised to it's part of their disability. All children do that. They grow out of that. And challenging behaviour can be refusing to brush your teeth and stomping your feet on the ground every day. And so people can interpret violence as challenging behaviour. But if you say, no, my child is violent to me, that's very different. If you're getting punched in the face to
Mm-hmm.
a child just saying, no, I'm not going to do that. No, you can't make me, or swearing at you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a lot of discussion around PDA and the connection of autism with PDA, and PDA will lead to a lot of no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stomp my feet. I might throw over a chair. But as you're saying, it's incredibly different to a child who is using weapons or holding a pet hostage in a room to get what they want, or finding those forms of excessive manipulation that are taking over the life of the parent and siblings as well.
And if parents are listening to this and thinking it's not violent, my child's not violent, and having problems with that, I will suggest that they're not experiencing child to parent violence, because if they were, they'd probably feel very differently about it. And there's different extremes and levels of child to parent violence as well. Some children might only dysregulate once or twice a year, and it might be big, and they might smash a window. With other families, we found we did a survey of parents and caregivers, which is the first data collection in New Zealand of child to parent violence. And we found that 19% of our parents, their children were dysregulating multiple times a day, and the violence could go on for hours a day. And the next most common was weekly. I think it was 36%. I haven't got my report in front of me. Was experiencing it weekly, and other variants were like they're less likely to have child to parent violence monthly or yearly. It's about 11%. So most of it occurs weekly, daily, or multiple times a day. So I suggest if parents are feeling affronted that you can't call my child violent, there's reasons for it. They maybe not experience the level of violence that other parents have.
Mm. And, the violence is still unacceptable, and it's still scary, and it still it's probably quite triggering and traumatic for the parent when they're experiencing it.
Yeah.
But you may be able to look at other types of symptomology, patterns around that behaviour to see what's triggering that and manage it a lot more effectively than something that's happening at the
Yeah.
frequency you're talking about.
What I've found is parents are generally, if their child, because work in my job, I work mostly with neurodivergent or disabled cohorts, and what I'm finding is parents are really generally very skilled on their
Mm.
child's disability. They're accommodating their child's disability. They've read up, they've learnt about it. A lot of them are using low demand parenting because they've found that that's worked really well, but they're still not being able to reduce the violence towards them in all cases. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And some days it works and then some
Yeah.
days it doesn't. There's many reasons why that this can occur.
I think you raised a really great point there about the variability and the complexity around why it can occur. And I think it's a really interesting time to bring into the conversation the difference in viewpoints between partner to partner violence and child to parent violence and how differently it's discussed. And I find that because talking about those various triggers, trying to understand those various triggers, not always understanding what's going to create the situation, being hyper vigilant, are very similar across those two situations.
Yes, I think child to parent violence is very similar to intimate partner violence. I went because obviously I've come to this role from my own lived experience. I've got a neurodivergent daughter, and we had a lot of violence. I went for counselling to a family violence centre, and the woman told me that everything I was saying was very similar to intimate partner violence. Because I said to her, sometimes I know my daughter's building up and I'm going to be hit. So I'm hyper vigilant, waiting for it to happen. So sometimes I just want to get on with my day. So I will actually trigger her so she can hit me and we can get over it and we can move on with our day. And she was saying, oh my God, that's what a lot of women in intimate partner violence say as well, that they trigger because the stress of waiting for it to happen, it's going to happen. And so let's just get it over and done with. And so there's lots of parallels of intimate partner violence, and the level of violence can be very extreme. We've had parents with broken bones. We've had parents say that they were injured, and 4 years on, they've still not healed from their injuries from their child. So it can be very extreme. The only difference is between intimate partner violence is services recognise it. You can go into a women's refuge. And I mean, it's very difficult for women to leave an intimate partner violence because when they leave, they're most at risk of being killed or seriously injured. So I'm not minimising what they go through.
Mm.
But I've had women's refuge ring me and say, you're all right, after the police have been called to my house as a follow-up. And I'm like, no, I'm not. But they won't do anything about it. So there's nowhere for parents to go. And I know one day my daughter, she was 8, and my husband took my son out fishing for the day. And I was at home with my daughter. So we arranged to go out to feed the ducks, and they were going for sushi. So we fed the ducks and it was all going wrong. We went to the sushi shop and it was a Good Friday, and silly me, I forgot that the sushi shop would be closed. And I thought, oh no. So I offered to take her to McDonald's and she said no. And we went home and I thought, oh dear. And so every time I used to have to go out in the garden to hang the washing out, I'd have to take my keys out because she'd lock me out of the house. So I went out there to hang washing up and she locked me out and hadn't got my keys. And I saw her filling a big bowl of water from the sink. And I thought, she's going to throw that over me. And I thought, made a decision. I thought, I'm going to let her throw the water over me and then it would just get it over and done with and we can get on with our day. So she came out and I was sitting down and I just let her throw the water at me. But then she started to hit me. So I grabbed my keys and I ran inside and I ran to my car and I got in my car and I drove off my driveway. And then I was thinking, I've left a disabled child who's 8 unattended. What do I do? So I drove back on the driveway. And she's got a big vase and she's saying, pointing to me and the vase, like, you're going to get it. So it took me 40 minutes before she'd calmed down so I could get in the house. And in the meantime, I'd driven to the local police station and it was closed. and I didn't know what to do. My neighbours were out, and I was thinking, do I go in? And so eventually I got in the house, and then I sat down, and then suddenly I was reading, I thought, I won't engage with her, so I don't want to trigger her. Let's keep it very calm. And I was reading the TV guide, and all of a sudden this knife was coming, and she was stabbing the TV guide, saying, "This is going to be you next, bitch." And I had to run off again. But I was more concerned about leaving an 8-year-old unattended than I was about being stabbed. So parents have got this dilemma. Legally, we're responsible for our children as their parents. We can't just walk out because we could get done for like abandoning our children. So there's this real dilemma. What do you do? And because nothing seems to be recognised about child-to-parent violence, it's not in New Zealand, that services don't know what to do, so they do nothing. And families are just left isolated, dealing with sometimes very violent children with multiple times a day levels of violence, and there's no support for them or the child.
And that guardianship legality really is. It's so complicated in terms of being able to get assistance, because at the end of the day, you know, you're meant to be their decision maker, their caretaker. That's the perception in the eyes of the law. And yet you have a child who has taken over the position of control in the family and is effectively running the family, because everyone is moving around their moods and their behaviours to ensure that they minimise what's happening. But there's no one that can step in a position and say, I'm going to come in and help here because you're dealing with a minor, which is so difficult. And then there is that huge loading of a parent that we naturally have when we care for children, that, you know, we feel responsible, we feel accountable. What did I do to cause this? What haven't I done to prevent this? You know, how am I failing as a parent for this to mean that this is actually going on in my house? And it's got nothing to do with the parent's actions. It's got to do with the emotional capacity and the rage within the child.
Yes, and there's something very sacred about a mother-child bond as well. It's a beautiful bond, it's a sacred bond, and we've got societal expectations of what parents should be that's enforced from cradle to the grave. Put boundaries in, do consequences, do these blinking reward charts. Oh yeah, great. And we've got these perceptions that it's permissive parenting. So when your child is violent to you, that absolutely destroys you inside, because you've got this child who you love more than anything and you want to nurture. And some children, especially if they're adopted, and like my children are adopted, if they're adopted and fostered, you're the nurturing enemy. And they don't feel safe in families, some children. And so, you know, to want to be this nurturer and this intense longing to be a mother and have your child hurt you, it's absolutely destroying. And then you've got the society blame. Professionals will say to you, do a parenting course. You need to put boundaries in. And they don't understand your child neurodevelopmentally at all. And they haven't got to know your child. They just want to put the blame. And then you've got outsiders. A lot of our families told us how isolated they were from the rest of their families, because families members say, well, they don't do that for me, so it must be you. And of course they don't do it, because they mask and they want to be liked by other people. Not all children mask. Some children will be violent outside the home, but a lot mask. And so of course they're good for other family members. So then the family members don't see it, and they think that the parents are making up the extreme levels of violence. And they blame them. Well, they don't know to do it for me. You need to put boundaries in, or you need to give them a good smack. And then you go to professionals, and professionals don't take a neurodevelopmental point of view. They say, oh, it's their age. They go out of it. You need to do this. You need to do that. So you've got the shame and guilt from all of society coming at you from all angles. So families tend to isolate from other people. So they're left at home in isolation, not being invited anywhere or not wanting to go anywhere, because sometimes if they go, they know the child's going to be so overstimulated. When they get home, the violence is going to be worse. So they're left, you know, with these high and complex needs children with no support, and professionals don't get it. They just don't get it. It's very easy to blame people, and then you think, oh, I'm a good professional because I've given them some advice. We had parents say that they'd had to be to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist told them they had to put boundaries and told them what they needed to do. And when they tried to enforce it, they'd been badly assaulted by their child. So a lot of the advice that professionals giving is actually very dangerous unless they understand the family. And neurodivergent parents spend 50% more time with their children than their neurotypical peers. So these parents are parenting very hard anyway, and doing the best that they can. So really they need to be supported and told what a good job they're doing, because most of the parents that I've met are just absolutely amazing parents. And even though despite the violence, they don't blame their child, they understand their child, they don't want their child criminalised, so they won't ring the police because they want people to understand and support the family. This isn't about blaming the child, but it's not about blaming the parents either. The violence is the problem, not anybody in the problem.
I think you've raised so many great points there, and I'm going to have to try and get my brain to work around working through each of them. I think, talking about understanding neurodevelopmental age is it's so fundamental. I think about it in the context of my 9-year-old who is so exceptionally bright, and grasps all of these incredible concepts, and yet at the same time we're looking at a developmental level of a 3-year-old. That's where he is. His emotional management, his social capacity, basically his cognitive and his executive functioning, when you look at it from that level, is a 3-year-old. And you don't understand how that frustration builds within a child because they have those varying capacities. Then you can't, as a professional, have the proper level of compassion and empathy, and also the proper level of strategies. Because if you throw the boundaries and the parenting rules that are expected for a neurotypical 9-year-old on a developmentally 3-year-old, of course they're going to lash out. They don't have the ability to be able to do what you're asking them to do.
And chronological age is very different from developmental age. Like it's the child with FASD, they might have a reading age of, so they're 10, they might have a 10-year-old reading age, but they might have emotional regulation of an 18-month-old. Their speech and language might be like a 4-year-old. Their drawing ability might be that of an 18, 20-year-old. So it's very patchy development. And unless you have these diagnoses which drill down into this, so you understand your child, it's very difficult for people to understand. And I do know we had some fantastic teachers when our children were at school, but also we had some dreadful teachers who you take the report in and they'd say, I haven't got time to read that. I haven't got time to do that. And you think, I know my child's going to have a really bad year this year, and I know you're going to have a really bad year as well.
Yep. And look, it's interesting you say that. We went through a bout once again with Mr. 9, and it's funny, so Mr. 7 has FASD, but the way that his aggression comes out is very, very different, and his emotional impulse control. But Mr. 9, before he left mainstream school, he was lashing out, and that's one of the reasons that we removed him, because we could see how much it was attacking his nervous system, attacking his sensory overwhelm, and he was literally going in, turning classrooms upside down, flipping the whole classroom, biting his education aid, his teacher's aid. And once again, like when you drill down into it, just like you were saying, a lot of the feedback that was provided, these are the things that are going to be overwhelming. These are the things that are not going to fit in the way that they operate. And this was a point that I was hoping we could come to. Those were being ignored. And so by 11 o'clock in the morning, he was so overwhelmed that his only capacity to know how to tell everyone that he was so overwhelmed was to flip a classroom upside down and bite his teacher's aid. And I suppose the thing that I want to lead through to that is, and this is not in any way excusing the violence, because the violence in itself is traumatic and exhausting and draining on anyone experiencing it. But we do have these children where societal structures are so exhausting for them, are so overwhelming for them, and they don't have what we would consider the normal outlets to be able to express those. So we're looking at such a complex issue. We're looking at, the fact that they're not they're not being understood, and therefore it's building up in this huge capacity. You've got a parent that they know that does understand them. So that's where the tap gets opened and everything comes out. And then you have a system that doesn't provide support for the parent when those explosions happen. And it's a really toxic formula.
Yes, it is. And I'd like to say sometimes I think even though some parents could accommodate to the nth degree and everything could be all right, some children will still, their nervous systems are so in fight or flight. There's like a puff of wind might hit their face and send them into dysregulated state.
Yeah.
As well. So I think I do think it's important to say, because I always used to think with the FASD, I got so upskilled about FASD and what I needed to do so I could understand my child. And I still was getting a lot of violence. And I blame myself even more then, because I thought, what am I doing wrong? I'm following all the recommended strategies and I'm still getting violence. Why aren't other people that I know with FASD children, why aren't their children violent? And that added to my sense of shame and guilt. And I do think in the disabled community, we're not very good at talking about the violence. It's a very taboo subject. It's very hidden. And if people do talk about it on social media, it's quite often shut down. And I do think we need to be having these open conversations, because the violence is happening. We're not blaming anybody about it, but we need to be able to talk about it so correct support can emerge for parents as well.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. I mean, the only way to create a compassionate and empathetic conversation is to continue the discussion so that people understand how much it happens. And as you're saying, the more it's discussed, the more that it is seen as a support deficit. And there's so much gaslighting that happens to parents who have neurodivergent children already. It's constantly. It's currently going on in Australia at the moment with the recent NDIS announcements, without getting on a soapbox about it. But the language that was chosen to be used when the announcements were given about children and their needs on the early intervention NDIS were incredibly gaslighting and severely minimising in terms of understanding what parents go through. As you said, 40 to 50% more time with their child. I mean, if someone actually thinks about the capacity for that while they still have to run a normal household, that is enormous. So we've got that layer of gaslighting that's already going on. And then the uncomfortability, the taboo around thinking about children being violent to parents totally squashes that level of the conversation. People don't want to talk about it. And I don't know, I think of those parents and carers who are trying to get through every single day, but realizing that there's no real way that they can talk about the reality of what's going on unless they find someone who's going through the same thing.
Yeah. Peer support has been found to be one of the most helpful things for families living with this. We run a peer support group in New Zealand for our parents and caregivers, just so they can get together and they can chat and they can be honest. And they do sometimes talk about strategies. They talk about low demand parenting a lot. That comes up a lot. And because they all recognise that they've instinctively, this is what my child needs and this is what I've got to do. So peer support is really good, because there's no solution to child to parent violence, not one solution. There's no one size fits all, because there's so many varying reasons why this might happen. Some children might have grown up with violence in the home. So through social learning, they might have learned that response. A lot don't, some do. Some children, trauma, childhood ACEs, which neurodivergent children have massive trauma through their everyday life. And that's not necessarily at home. That's the environments they're mixing with and interacting with who don't get them. So that's massive trauma. They don't feel that they fit in. They're bullied at school horrendously. And that's not just by pupils, but by teachers and systems as well. So there's a lot of pressure on our children within communities as well. They don't fit in. So childhood ACEs is a big one, adverse childhood experiences. Some children in the adoption and fostering community, they've had massive trauma there. So there's attachment stuff going on as well. It's very complex and it's very interwoven. So what will work for one family as a solution might not work for any other family. So it's very insulting to parents' intelligence to say, put boundaries in, do this parenting course, do this, because I think these are generally, not all, but generally very skilled parents.
Just sit with them and breathe. Okay, when my child wants to punch me in the face, I'm just going to sit with them and breathe.
Yeah, and I hate it. I get very annoyed when I hear people talk about co-regulation. Co-regulation. If your child assaults you every day, there's no way you can co-regulate your child because it's a biological response. Your own nervous systems are hypervigilant all the time. You're looking for when your child might get triggered. You're trying to avoid those triggers. When you think they might get triggered, you're thinking, where's my house keys? Where's my safety exits? Where's the pets? Where's the other siblings? Are they safe? And you're thinking all these things while trying to have a neutral tone, a neutral face, because they pick up on the slightest nuances of your facial expressions. So I actually call garbage co-regulation because it's absolutely impossible. Your own body will be in that fight or flight response immediately, and your child will pick up on that as well because they're so in tune and nuanced with us as well. And so it's really difficult to co-regulate, and I don't bother trying.
You're a typical child, or you're talking to a child who has had the capacity to learn how to understand their own feelings and their emotions. Co-regulation is amazing. It's beautiful. But it's just like turning around and saying, I need you to put a Band-Aid on when you've gashed your head open. When we're dealing with the situations that you're talking about, co-regulation is way beyond anything that's going to be able to fix anything. And as you said, how on earth are you meant to bring your own state that is terrified of being in your own home down to a place where you can share that calm with someone who's exploded like a volcano?
What we found in our survey that parents live in fear, 75% live in fear in their home. And they because they're constantly, the cortisol level is going around their own body, and cortisol is so damaging and toxic to the body that they've got joint pain, they've got muscle aches, they've got headaches. A third of parents have heart palpitations all the time, and they've got all these health problems from living with violence in their home. And emotionally, they've got depression, they've got anxiety. They're just fearful all the time. They've got a gastro,
brain fog, IBS. Yeah.
Gut problems. Yeah, so the fallout is absolutely massive. So what we do actually, we're running our second workshop soon as well. We run it with a somatic coach, and we do nourishing the nervous system for parents and caregivers because they need to learn strategies to regulate their own nervous system so they don't get so ill and so burnt out, because it leads to being burnt out, and then you've got blocked care. I don't like the word blocked care, but it's where parents look at their child and think, I love you, but I don't want to parent you. And they just feel like, oh, and they haven't got the energy just to deal with yet another thing, and they're just not putting one foot in front of the other all day. So if they nourish and replenish their own nervous system, that's very healing and nurturing for them. So they, there's a lot known about helping our children with their nervous system, but we don't look at our own, and we need to, because we are there. We need to look at us and look after ourselves first and foremost, because if we're not strong, our children can't ever be strong.
100%. We did an episode a while back, I think back in season 2, around self-care, the guilt that comes with the perception of self-care, and also how we can realistically self-care, and those kinds of moments, those little things are so fundamental but so hard for us to do. We also had a big conversation, it was one of our first Taboo Topics, about when you love your child, blocked care, when you love your child but you don't like your child. At that particular point in time, you don't want to be near them. You need space from them. It's just all too much. And there was a really great point that Shell Taylor made during that episode where she said, when you are in that space, whatever you need to give yourself a little bit of dopamine to counteract that cortisol is okay. we always say don't doom scroll. We say eat healthy. But if you're at a point where what you need to do is sit on your phone for 10 minutes and completely zone out, and that's what will bring you back, do it. You need to eat a whole block of chocolate, half a tub of ice cream, because it's the thing that your brain actually needs in that point to be able to go out and deal with your child. Do it, wash the guilt away, you know?
Really good that you're having those conversations as well, because I think parents feel, for some parents, self-care or respite is actually more dangerous because their child knows that they're going to respite, so they're more violent to try and control the situation because they've got anxiety, so there's more violence towards the parent, and then when they pick them up there's more violence because the child feels abandoned. So some parents, it's respite's not safe for them, so self-care can be just about sitting and breathing, taking some deep breaths, because for other people, self-care and going out and enjoying yourself is too dangerous, so you can't do it.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. I mean, we're really in a situation, once again, with what you said, 50% of extra parenting load. Like, where do we find the time? So what we need to do is we need to find those little moments. Whether
And
you know,
that guilt, don't we?
and that's a big one for me that I've started. Like, it's so small, but in the morning now, I don't start my day with a coffee. I start my day with a cup of tea. It's bigger, takes longer to drink. I can wrap my hands around it, and I get to be part and present in that moment, savor the flavor of the tea. And it's only a little thing, but it's space. You know, it's being in that particular point in time.
Yeah, and it is bringing it down to that moment, because that's mindfulness as well, isn't it? When you put your hands around the teacup and feel the warmth of it, and that can be quite nurturing. And it is those little moments, like we feel guilty, like I should be going out and enjoying myself, but I'm too tired to do that.
Or I don't want to have to explain when someone says to me, "How are you going today?" You don't want to answer that question. You know how loaded that question is. So going out and having a coffee somewhere or catching up with someone, it might actually feel too overwhelming in that moment. And so what you want to do is you just want to breathe. You just want to have some space, you know? I also wanted to say, while we're having this conversation, you know, we're talking about really loaded situations with children. And it can sound very negative towards those children, but I think, you know, any parent who's listening to this who's got a child that exhibits child-to-parent violence probably already knows this, that they are there based on a range of circumstances that have brought them to this situation. So when we're talking adopted children, which you and I both have, we're talking about intra-utero trauma. We're talking about attachment trauma and any other trauma they may have experienced along the way. So that's going to impact their neurological wiring. We've got whatever has happened with other forms of neurodivergence, whether that's ADHD, ASD, even the complexities around the challenges at school. If you've got dyslexia, dyscalculia, all of those things that are loading everything up. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, what that does to the brain wiring and the neurology. So we're often talking a very complicated, as you said before, it's a complex picture. We're not talking about a child who is just filled with rage for no reason and has suddenly decided that they want to be spiteful to their parent. We're talking about these poor children who, a lot of the time afterwards, like if I see my 7-year-old and he's gone on a physical lash out of like pushing things over and maybe kicking a hole in the wall, he looks at those things that he knows. He knows exactly what he's done and he hates himself for it. And what that actually does is it often fuels the later return of another situation because he's so ashamed of who he is. So we're also talking children who are just so fragile in their own senses of themselves. There's no one size fits all answer.
Yeah, the children who use the violence, it affects the whole family, the whole whole-whānau. So that's why whole-whānau family response is needed, because the child using the violence has low self-esteem. They know that their parents don't want to spend time with them, because and parents feel guilty about this because they know by spending time with their children, they might end up being violent to them, or probably will if they've got attachment problems. So they know that their parents don't want to spend time with them. And they grow up with very low self-esteem, and they're more likely to have intimate partner relationships, violence in those as well as adults. So very low self-esteem as well. And I'd like to shout out for siblings. This is something else that's never talked about.
Yes.
Our survey found that 57% of siblings were attacked by the violent child in the home as well. And they grow up, they call them glass children. And that's because the parents look straight through that child, not because they want to, but if you've got a child who's continually dysregulating, you're trying to keep a lid on everything, you're trying to keep the siblings safe. So you say, go to your room if they start to kick off and dysregulate. So you look through that child because they're behaving themselves and you're dealing to the most pressing issue. And so these children, they grow up and they have low self-esteem. They don't believe that they're worthy of one-on-one support, or that they're worthy of someone's attention. A lot of them. I know my son.
Pleasers, mass become people pleasers because they know all they can do is just say yes.
My son, he's adopted as well. And towards the end, when my daughter was 14, just before she actually had to go into care because it was too unsafe for the family for her to remain in the home, which absolutely broke my heart. And I've never fully recovered from putting my child in care when she came from care. And my son, he started to try and protect me. He didn't want to come home because he thought he'd find me dead on the floor, killed by my daughter who wouldn't have meant to kill me. But he was scared to come home. So when she started attacking me, he started to go for her, and it became very unsafe. And then one day after an incident, I went in to check on him, and he was in the fetal position, and he was saying, "I can't do this anymore. I'm fine. I'm going to kill her." And that was the tipping point for me when I thought, this is so unsafe. He's going to end up doing something. And so then she went into care, and he just stopped leaving the house. He's hardly left the house in 5 years. And he said to me one day, "I think I'm autistic, Mum." And I went, "No, you're not." And he said, "I think I am, Mum." And I went, "No." And so we had him diagnosed at 19, and he was autistic, and the biomarkers had been there all through his childhood. And because my daughter was so full on and so complex, I'd missed all these markers. And I feel guilty now. I feel terrible that I missed that. How could I miss that? But it's quite easy to miss it when you're dealing with such complex behaviour from another child. So parents have got this massive guilt that they feel like they're failing as a parent. They're being blamed by society and professionals. They feel like they're failing the child who's violent to them because that bond that they desperately want with their child, they think they're doing something wrong. And then they feel like they're failing the siblings. So they feel like they're getting everything wrong.
And yet all they're trying to do is survive.
Yeah, and it is survival. It's just surviving, getting through every day. And a lot of parents have talked about suicide ideation, about ending it as a way just to make everything stop. And so that's why we need to be having these conversations. We need to be saying to families, what can we do to support you? Because I think a lot of families are realistic, and some know it's not a quick or easy fix. And that's okay. But what's not okay is not giving support to those parents and the whole family members as well, so they can be as strong as they can be for their children. We just want the best for our children. We love our children deeply.
Yeah, and that's such a, like, I wish I could bold and underline what you've just said. That's the biggest thing, that parents, they love their children. They're staying in these situations, they're stuck without support, but they deeply, deeply love and want the best for their children. And they just want to find a way to help them and help the rest of their family in that situation. So I guess it's probably a really good time to talk about, or now as we said, the lack of supports that are available. And how much you probably need, and this is what's so unfair, because we do this as parents of neurodivergent children anyway. You need to yell for help. You can't whisper. You can't ask quietly. You need to yell for help. So, and I don't mean that in a literal sense when you're at home. You can do that too if you need to, 100%. But I think, when you go to agencies and you're talking to them about the fact that you've got violence happening, when you're talking to your GP about how there's violence happening, or a paediatrician or anything, the one thing I think that keeps coming across is that you need to yell about that help. Otherwise, it will be dismissed.
It will be. I know Victoria in Australia has got a coordinated response to child-to-parent violence. It's the local government led there, and so there's funding and there's been upskilling of services. So Victoria's quite good at responding to child-to-parent violence, but I don't think that's happening elsewhere in Australia. I know in New Zealand, it's at the moment, is parents are saying, I'm frightened my child's going to kill me, some parents are saying. And our Ranga Tamariki, our social services provider, care and protection, if the child is not at risk from the parents, they don't care. They're not interested if the child's hurting the parents, and they won't get involved. So there's a lot of brick walls for parents in New Zealand. The parents don't know what to do, and I don't know what to do, because it's like hitting a brick wall.
Mm.
And I should imagine it's like that in a lot of Australia, unless you live in Victoria, and you'll get a compassion and understanding there. I hope so, because if the practitioners have found understand neurodivergence, which I think that they probably will do, most of them in Victoria, because they've had upskilling.
Which is, look, it's a start. It's a start, but we need to see that rolled out further, and we need to see parents taken seriously when they say that they need help. And I think, look, that's broad. That's in this instance of child-to-parent violence, but I also think more broadly when we're talking about parents of neurodivergent children, when they say they need help, we need a system that listens, and we definitely need a system that listens when we're talking about families that are literally at risk of serious levels of violence, hospital levels of violence, long-term mental health damage that comes from other forms of non-physical violence. We need a system that responds and that listens and takes it seriously.
Yeah, I'd like to say to parents listening to this might think my child only verbally abuses me, so it's not so bad. And I'd like to say, just we've talked about violence a lot and parents being seriously hurt. I'd like to say the emotional toll is just as horrific, the impact on parents, just because you can't see it. Coercive control can be massive, where you can't go to the toilet unless you get permission. If you don't take your child where they want to go, you're going to get hit. So the threat of violence all the time, and the child can use knives, not hit you, but threaten you with knives all the time. And some parents as well, the coercive control, it can be digital as well. Some parents have told me in a 2-week period, they got 500 messages from their child continually bombarding them. Where are you, bitch? What time are you going to be back? If you're not back at this time, I'm going to do this. And continually demanding. And so this can be a form of violence, that the emotional toll is massive. Because if someone, you're more likely to get a response if you've got a black eye from your child or a broken arm. You're more likely to get service responding saying we need to do something. But if you haven't got any physical injuries, people can't understand sometimes that level of coercive control. And I'd like to also say, and this can be quite a contentious issue, because how we view children self-harming, we like to think, we always say that a child's in deep distress, which they are, but in child-to-parent violence, children will quite often use self-harming as a form of controlling the parents. My daughter used to cut her wrists and send me videos of the blood dripping down her arms and stuff, and it was a form of control as well. So a lot of children, 35% of parents and caregivers in our survey identified that the child used self-harm as a form of control.
Threatening suicide as well. Yeah, threatening suicide is the same. Yeah. I'll kill myself if you don't do what I'm telling you I need you to do. Yeah.
And it's so distressing for parents to see their child self-harming or hurting themselves. It that blows all things, because we're taught that a child's in deep distress, which they are, but there's another added element to this as well.
I think something that I want to say also to the parents, and firstly, I'll go back a little bit first. I want to say that emotional and mental health damage is, as you said, it's invisible. And the physical damage heals eventually, but the emotional damage, whether it comes from a physical injury or it comes from emotional manipulation, that is much harder to work through for a parent or anyone. And the damage that it does internally, your nervous system, to your cortisol, to the way that your hormones deal with adrenaline, your sleep, all of those things are so massive. They actually end up causing physical damage internally, and they really can't be taken for granted just because we can't see them. So what I wanted to say to parents is, please take those things really seriously within yourself. So if you are feeling like your cortisol is really high, if you are feeling like your nervous system can't calm down, you do need to take note of that, and you need to go and, even if it's a telehealth with a GP because you can't get out of the house, you need to take that seriously, because those kinds of things have really long-term impacts. High constant levels of chronic stress will shorten your life. It shortens your lifespan. So it is that serious. And we are very often so worried about our children that we ignore ourselves. But as we said earlier, as frequently gets said, if we collapse, what happens then? And we don't deserve to collapse. We don't deserve, that's not what should be happening to us. So if you can feel any of those internal triggers starting, it is so important to get in front of a GP, have a conversation, so that you can start looking after your internal nervous system, and you're not dealing with this problem 10, 20 years down the track when you've got a lot more to undo. I'm saying this also is personal experience. So between my child life and my earlier life when I was a kid, I have a very high operating nervous system, and I've recently been diagnosed with chronic inflammation, which has come about from long exposure to high spikes in adrenaline and cortisol. So no stop, please make sure you're looking after yourself. Oh, to be honest, Lee, I don't know how to wrap this up, because it's such a big, important, weighty conversation when we don't have a solution. I might turn to you and say, what would you really like to say to people listening?
I'd say to people listening, if you go to a professional and they tell you it's your parenting, arm yourself with some resources. You can always email me, Lee, Tempest, TEMPEST, at VisAble, visable.co.nz, and I will send you some resources so you can show them to professionals and say, no, mate, you need to upskill yourself and you need to upskill your practice, because they will try and take the easiest option and say it's your parenting and put you on a one-size-fits-all parenting course. And it's not that. It needs a multi-agency response where they're looking after your needs, your children's needs, the siblings' needs. It's everybody's problem. It's not a one person's problem here. And it's not your parenting. You're doing amazing. And we see you and we hear you. We know it's not your parenting, and we know it's not your child's fault either. The violence is the problem, nothing else.
I couldn't have said it any better. That was an incredible way to wrap it up. Thank you, Lee, not only for your experience, but also for sharing your personal stories, which I'm sure are always difficult every time you do. And so I feel really privileged that you've taken the time to do that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Carly. Thank you, everybody.
Be sure to check the show notes on our website for any links and references. You can find us at youcangrowyourownway.podbean.com. And if you found this episode helpful, we would love you to help us get the word out. You can share the podcast, tell a friend, and be sure to click the follow or subscribe button so you can access all our new episodes. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram, where we would love to connect with you. You Can Grow Your Own Way recognises Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of this place, now known as Australia. We're coming to you from Jabberung, Jawajali and Wadawurrung country, the country of our guest speaker, and from wherever you are listening. We respect the elders of the past and present, and we share our friendship and kindness.